So I'm joined now by AU professor Dr. Gregg Murray, who's a political science professor over at the university, to give us a little bit more insight, kind of bring some of that expertise with him. So, Dr. Murray, appreciate you joining us here and giving us some of your time this morning.
Oh, great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so first of all, we have now had some major players on both sides announce their candidacy. We've got Joe Biden, the incumbent, running for re-election. We've got Donald Trump on the Democratic side, along with South Carolina, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, as well as a couple others. So any big surprises or any big takeaways from these first few candidates who have announced?
I don't think there are any big surprises at this point. Of course, we always expected President Biden to re-announce his election and go forward, despite some concerns about him. On the Republican side, Trump has been declared now for I don't know how long, what, a month or two at least, I think. And there's a lot of talk about Ron DeSantis, the governor from Florida, is all but announced that he's running. So no, I don't think there are any huge surprises at this point. There's some really interesting candidates in it. I think that sort of one of the big surprises, maybe if you want to think of it this way, is if it comes down to a Biden-Trump showdown, a lot of people are not very enthusiastic about that at all. So that's a big consideration in terms of how this election plays out conceivably.
Yeah. With Governor DeSantis, he's kind of an interesting one because he is so powerful in Florida right now. He won that governor's race by 20 points or something like that. And a battle with Donald Trump is something that a lot of people don't necessarily come out looking better after. Would it behoove him to maybe stay out of this, and then he's still pretty young and relatively early in his political career, and then maybe take a back seat this time and then go for it in maybe 2028 or 2032?
That's certainly a well thought out argument. I think the other side of that is as well, though, is that a lot of people feel like they have their time, and now is their time, and if they miss it, they may never re-achieve that position. As you said, he did really well in his last gubernatorial election. So he's showing great power right now. He's running around the country doing what it looks like declared candidates do. The problem for him is it's something that you can sort of that's suggested by your question. He's not really making up any ground on Donald Trump right now. So it's not clear that even if he gets in, he's going to be able to prevail, and he may just get beat up. So my gut is he's going to probably do it. A lot of it's going to depend on if some of the other folks that are also considering running for president on the Republican side step aside and let it be a sort of Trump non-Trump race, and that might be the only way that a non-Trump candidate has a chance on the Republican side.
Yeah, and speaking of former President Donald Trump, he was leading South Carolina straw polls pretty heavily the last time we checked in. Obviously, he's got a lot of legal issues going on right now, but it seems that a lot of people are starting to rally behind him because of that, because they're frustrated with the system or they don't believe all the accusations, whatever it may be. Do you think all of his legal troubles are actually helping him, or are they hurting him, or are they kind of canceling each other out?
Well, I mean, that's interesting. That's a great question because it depends on how you look at it. I think on the Republican primary side, to some degree, it helps him. On the general election side, it's probably devastating to him. So, it's six of one, half dozen of the other. Yeah, he's probably being helped with Republicans. That's the nature of his slice of the electorate is sort of this anti-establishment. The world is out to get you sort of voters. And so when he gets attacked by this quote the system that way, I mean that does nothing but bolster their support for him. On the other side, if he does manage to make it to the general election in November, there are a lot of people who are going to look at him and say, "Oh my gosh, look at all these legal problems he's got. He's got. Is this really the person we want to represent us as president of the country?"
Yeah. And so on the other side, we've got Joe Biden, who is obviously the current president and running for re-election, going to be the oldest to run, possibly the oldest to win if he does that. Who gives Republicans the best chance to take back the White House, in your opinion, against Joe Biden?
Yeah, well, against well, okay. So here's the major consideration on I think on the Democratic side. incumbent presidents have incredible control over their party. And when you have control over the party, you have control over all the resources of the party, the fundraising, all the campaigning apparatus, all that sort of thing. So incumbents become extraordinarily difficult to beat. So the question becomes, I don't think anybody's going to beat him in a primary, because I don't think that anybody of any real high quality is going to run against him in the primary. I think the only way it won't be President Biden running for re-election is if he chooses himself to step down. Now, that said, so say he does step down, who are some of the strong contenders you could think of? U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He's been very high profile lately. Maybe, and he did very well in the 2020 election. But the reason he's been high profile lately is for some of the reasons, for not positive reasons, because some of the problems going on with air travel and train derailments and things like that. So that's a problem for him. And I think he would only run if President Biden stepped down, because he's Biden's transportation secretary. You can say basically the same thing for Vice President Harris. She's not going to run against President Biden. There is a declared candidate, one of the Kennedy clan, Robert F. Kennedy. I don't think he's taken as a big challenge, or considered a big challenge to President Biden, because he just is not that well known. Plus, he's an anti-vaccine activist, which is not popular with the Democratic electorate. So I think that would be a problem. There are some governors out there that are very popular in their state: Whitmer in Michigan, Polis in Colorado. Gavin Newsom in California, among the governors, is probably the biggest challenge. And if I was going to say, if anybody were to run against President Biden in a primary, it might be him, because the way he distinguishes himself from Biden is Biden's pretty much, let's all get along, and tries to be bipartisan to a degree. And Governor Newsom is much more, it's in your face. He's very partisan. And that might be a message for some that might be willing, that might work out. I don't know. There's a little talk about our very own in Georgia, Senator Warnock. He's battle tested to the extreme. He's run in several elections now, very competitive elections, and he's succeeded. So there's a little talk about him. I would certainly not expect to see him running against President Biden. He's probably a longer-term candidate, but he's still a local candidate, that I think folks locally, people look out for and consider.
Yeah, and two of the big players from 2020, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, doesn't look like either of them is running again. So it'll be kind of, if anybody decides to compete against Joe Biden, it'll be fresher candidates, maybe people that weren't as big in the 2020 race.
I agree.
Yeah, going back to the other side, we have those few announced candidates, Donald Trump and Nikki Haley, and I'm sure there are a couple that I might be missing. But of the unannounced candidates, we've got people that have been rumored: Tim Scott and Ron DeSantis and Mike Pence. Is there anybody else outside of those three that you've heard, any big names that we may need to keep an eye on?
I think there are all kinds of. The problem is there are all kinds of candidates, because it's up in the air. And you look at Donald Trump, who's far ahead in the polls, and he's very flawed as a candidate in terms of, if nothing else, it doesn't even matter if you agree with him politically or not. He's under extraordinary legal pressure. So there are all kinds of people that we could talk about. Mike Pence, I don't think we covered him earlier, his former vice president. He's a very solemn candidate, very serious guy. I think he's ideologically if you think of a conservative and you think of conservative values, he's the one who promotes them, right? He's a very serious politician, ideological thinker. So he's a very serious contender in that regard. Nikki Haley is a very serious contender for a lot of reasons, including the fact that she's been a very serious and successful, had a very serious and successful political career. She's been elected in South Carolina. twice as governor. She served as Trump's UN ambassador. So she's very skilled. Plus, what she also does is she offsets some of the diversity arguments that Democrats may make against Republicans, is that she's a female and she's also a person of color. So she ends up being a very interesting candidate as well. We mentioned Tim Scott. Tim Scott, the governor, I keep saying that, I'm sorry. The senator from South Carolina is a very interesting candidate, because what he is the opposite of both Trump and DeSantis. The very bellicose, very aggressive candidates. Tim Scott is the sunny, optimistic guy, right? And he kind of, to some degree, reminds me of Ronald Reagan, in the sense that was Reagan's trademark. President Reagan's trademark was being the optimist, and he very much echoes that sort of talk when he's talking. So I think he becomes potentially, if he can get some traction, a very serious candidate. And hey, not to get too much into the mechanics of it, but also remember, South Carolina is the third primary on the Republican side. So if he can get to his home state, he may really be vaulted up to the top somehow. So I think he has some real potential. We're, whatever you said, 15 months, 18 months out from the election. Who knows what this is really going to look like? Who knows? Former President Trump could. There's no telling. He'd literally be sitting in jail, next November. I mean, who knows? So I think that when you normally want to discount folks, like Tim Scott and even Nikki Haley, quite frankly, if you look at the polling, Nikki Haley is down at 4% support. It's easy to say, we're just going to disregard, candidates like that because they're too far out. But, we're so far out, and this is so dynamic on the Republican side. There is really no telling, what it could look like. I mean, I think the good news is for Republicans and for the country, and even Democrats, is I think we've got a bunch of quality candidates on both sides. And, hopefully the discussion that will ensue in 2024 and leading up to 2024 will be a discussion that's positive and not just, throwing mud at each other. So there's that potential.
Yeah. And one more thing with Tim Scott, he created this exploratory committee. And actually, if we go back to his Senate campaign, he had this, I think it was $50 million or something that he raised for a race he was always going to win. So kind of a sign that something bigger was coming. When he launches this exploratory committee, is that truly just want to see where people are at? Or is that usually a first step towards saying, hey, I'm announcing my campaign, I'm throwing my hat in the ring?
Well, I think it's a trial balloon thing. I mean, I can't tell you the probabilities looking at people who have announced exploratory committees and how often they've actually gone on ahead to run. I think it's a very serious step. I think your insight, Nick, on that he has all this money that he raised in an election he was already going to win is very insightful. And the thing about Tim Scott is that the big Republican donors like him and support him, and that's why he has all that money in the bank. And so I think that's, it really, his problem is, does he really want to jump in this race where you've got what I referred to earlier as bellicose candidates? Does he really want to get in that mess if it's Trump and DeSantis, fighting it out going through next summer, even if that late, it might even be starting at the beginning of the year. I don't know if he wants to kind of get in that game. But he may, and maybe he sees that as his lane that they talk about. You got the bellicose candidates and you got the optimistic candidates. And maybe he feels like he can kind of, that would be a way he could make some progress in the election.
Yeah. I want to come to Georgia, the state, because it's become a very popular state in recent years politically. We saw it turn blue in 2020 for Joe Biden. We saw Governor Kemp win the governor's race pretty handily this time around, but then Senator Warnock wins in a runoff against Herschel Walker. So we're kind of a bit of a purple state right now. What do you think it's going to take to win Georgia in 2024?
A non-Trump candidacy. I think I mean, I have no dog in this fight. I'm not particularly partisan. I'm very much a moderate. I think Trump and his involvement in the Georgia senatorial elections is what turned those two seats Democratic. And so I think that and you notice if you look at the statewide seats, Republicans dominated there. So if you know the only difference is that Donald Trump was involved in the senatorial elections, and you see how and you see how they went, and you see how he ended up losing governor, losing the presidential race. So, I think that Republicans at the federal level have a better chance if former President Trump stays out of it.
Yeah, and kind of following up on that too, once he turned on Governor Kemp following the 2020 election, we think about Kemp's incredibly close race with Stacey Abrams in 2018, and then this time around it wasn't that close, and the only real difference there was that Donald Trump cut ties with Brian Kemp after 2020. Same thing with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who picked up a win back in November as well. So when we see those things happening with the people that he cut ties with going on to win, but then we see these straw polls of him dominating in South Carolina. What do you make on exactly how much hold he has, not only on the party, but on the political sphere as a whole?
Well, he still has incredible influence on the whole political sphere, and not even just on Republicans, but on Democrats as well, because he can dominate news cycles fairly easily. He said strategically, and I mean, I look at this sort of clinically. Strategically, he says very contentious, inflammatory things, and that always draws the attention of folks. So he says things that a lot of professional politicians in previous generations, and the previous generation in this case, I think of as pre 2015, pre 2016, when he actually got in. I mean, they didn't really talk the way he talks. And but that's so when the fact that he does that, and you started to see an uptick of other folks talking about that, talking like that, at the local and state levels, you can see the controversy and the media coverage that they stir. And I think folks have incentive to behave like that if they think that's going to advance them personally. So he's going to continue to have that. There's a very interesting debate. Are his legal troubles, as we started out with, is that just extending his political life? If he weren't in all this trouble, would we still be as focused on him as we are? Because now every time, he's under what, 4 investigations, and every time one of these prosecutors announces something, he's in the news again, calling it a witch hunt. Now that's his strategy. I think there's probably some logic to it, but it's what gives him air to continue. So I think as long as he's doing that, then and he's being prosecuted like these things. And by the way, I think this stuff should be investigated. I think he's going to continue to have undue influence in U.S. politics.
Yeah. So let's talk about President Biden a little bit. Obviously, trying to regain the White House next year. I think in this day and age, it's almost really hard to do that with social media and specifically Twitter, and how quickly people can turn, and this mob mentality that we have on those social media websites. And it just feels like every little thing somebody does, there is a large group of people criticizing that move, and it almost makes it difficult to, it almost gives the advantage to the challengers, saying, look at all these bad things that he's done over the last 4 years. So what does President Biden need to do to win voters over and to keep the White House in 2024?
I think one of the major problems, he has 2 major problems. One is his age, and he cannot do anything about that. The interesting thing about him possibly running against Trump is that Trump is about the same age. So if Trump is, the Republican nominee, then that issue, for the most part, goes away, which you'll end up with these trolls you're talking about on social media criticizing both of them, and that becomes a wash. The other major issue, I think, for President Biden that he faces is the economy. And the inflation problem has been terrible. And I think, unfortunately, there's not a lot that presidents can do about it. So I'm not sure there's a lot he can do to fix that issue between now and the election. I think if I were on his team, I would probably just say, continue playing a solid game, continue doing what you think is best for the country, and go forward. Some of this stuff is just, quite frankly, beyond his control. From the Democratic perspective, I'm almost certain they want Trump to be the Republican nominee, because they've already beaten him, and they
Hmm.
know that a lot of folks either love or hate the guy. There doesn't seem to be any moderate response to the guy. So I mean, I think the Democrats probably want former President Trump to be the nominee, and of course that's beyond their control, but that is something that can be encouraged along from time to time if they decide to do some of the stuff they did in some of the congressional elections, where they started taking swipes at some of the, I don't know, what would you call them, more serious Republican candidates, where they managed to support some of those folks, some of their opposition, some of the more extreme Republican candidates, and unseat some of the moderates. And that backfired in some cases. In some cases, it didn't. So I think President Biden, all he can really do is kind of stay the course on what he's doing and try to do what he thinks is right. You're seeing a bunch of things coming out. He just did this electric vehicle executive order, and I mean that's straight out of the Democratic policy handbook, right? This is what they want to do, is promote electric vehicles. So I think that sort of stuff makes sense. He's got some legislative wins that he can tout. And I don't know what else to do, other than I think he's doing the stuff that he can do. Some of his more extreme support folks, some of the more extreme people on the Democratic side, want him to be more aggressive and in your face with Republicans. Um, I There's an argument for that. I get that, given that he knows he's got a pretty clear path through the Democratic primary. My suspicion is what he's really concerned about is the general election, and going and taking a bunch of swipes at Republicans, Republican leaners, and those sorts of folks, who may not, joyously support him, but he's okay, and he's certainly not possibly Trump. I don't think that beating up on those folks makes a lot of sense. So that's kind of my thoughts in terms of what he's doing. Needs to try to do to navigate to November.
Yeah, the economy, you brought that up as, kind of his one of the big things against him. What are going to be, other than that, I guess, the biggest points? I mean, we can't predict another, global pandemic, so I don't expect you
Right.
to break out the crystal ball here and guess on that. But what would you say, I guess, today are the biggest issues facing the nation that are going to shape the mold for what the main debates are in 2024?
He's got the economic issue. uh, you know the economic issue, I think, is the one he's got to figure out. If he's going to address anything, he's got to figure out how to effectively address. And he tried to do that with his Inflation Reduction Act. Maybe that's going to be enough. He can always, when the economy comes up, his response can always be, we did this Inflation Reduction Act thing. So there are other things, that he can conceivably do in terms of the economy. He's trying to do some stuff with jobs and things like that. So he can do that. Uh, that's going to be the main thing. Ukraine is kind of an interesting issue. Uh, he's you know he's I think he's right in saying the world cannot tolerate one country just going in and taking parts of another country. I think the people are mostly with him on that at this point, but there continue to be arguments. And, we had these arguments in Afghanistan and other countries where we've given a ton of aid. Is the money being spent how it's supposed to be spent, and all that? That sort of stuff could go south on him if people start looking at it really hard, or if there's something going on. So I think that's kind of a back burner issue that I think is still hot, but could end up, possibly being a problem for him you know, it could jump up and bite him, I guess, at some point. So I think that's an issue. Yeah, the COVID thing is really interesting because the last reports I saw, that's the leading cause of death in the U.S. We have something on the order of 250 people a day dying of COVID. And that could get traction conceivably again, particularly as these new variants come out. So we'll see if that, and it may not even be that. It may be the response, how he responds, how he promotes a government response to it, that could also be an issue. Now, there's one other thing, and it's kind of like the same thing that Trump is dealing with his legal issues. He's got this issue with his son, Hunter Biden, and they're starting to meet his Hunter's attorneys are starting to meet with the federal prosecutors. I don't know. I don't have any inside information on this, but it seems like this may be serious. Or getting serious, and I don't know how that's going to develop because it gets back. It's very similar to the age thing with Trump, you know. So if there ends up being a problem with Hunter, with his son, doing things that he shouldn't be doing, that to some degree offsets some of the problems that some of the criticisms of former President Trump in terms of his legal problems. So that's something to kind of watch too and see how that plays out. There are a lot of things. I think those are kind of the main things that I see could really derail him coming up right now. But like I said, there's a lot of China is very active in creating a lot of problems. I don't know how that. Who knows? What happens if China invades Taiwan, right? So, and at one point that was sort of an unthinkable issue, and now I'm not so sure that that's an unthinkable issue. If you listen to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he says that something to the effect that China plans on invading Taiwan sometime in the next few years here. If that happens before the 2024 election, well, what is that going to do to the whole presidential election dynamic? So the world is a fraught place in a lot of ways. So that's why it's the interesting thing to watch all this stuff.
Yeah, certainly a lot more going to unfold in the next year and a half. We don't know, what issues may pop up, like we were saying. You don't know who's going to enter the race, what legal issues people may have. So still a lot left to unpack, but we just kind of wanted to get this preliminary feeling out of the way, just kind of see what the temperature of the room was as the big candidates have started to announce their candidacy. So, Dr. Murray, we appreciate the time there. Was there anything else that you had that you wanted to add that we should know about before we wrap it up?
No, I think I'm all right, Nick. Thanks so much for talking to me today. I enjoyed talking about it, and I think this is important and interesting. I hope people are kind of paying attention. I know it's a little early, but I hope they're sort of thinking through some of this stuff that's happening right now.
Absolutely, and so we will probably reach out to you again as the race gets a little bit closer so we can kind of, again, just get a temperature for where we are.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. Take care.
Yes, sir. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Recording stopped.
So there you go. Dr. Murray over at AU, political science professor there, just kind of giving us the lay of the land for an early part of the 2024 presidential election, kind of where things stand right now. And again, as things start to develop over the next 6, 12, 18 months, I'm sure we will check back in with him and with the folks over at AU to give us more perspective and more of that expert insight.